What happened in qualifying for the
Qatar Grand Prix?
Tommy, you're looking very smug. One, because you're wearing a Mercedes top. Didn't realise, And secondly, Max Verstappen's on pole. So you've actually first and seconded it right now. Anyway, we'll get into that later. Because first and foremost, we're going to start with Q1. With the bottom 5 drivers were Albon, Lawson, Hulkenberg, Colapinto and Ocon. Let's go to a question. P1 Patreon member Captain Obs3420. Is the Williams' performance being held back due to how little spare parts they have? Their pace seems to have dropped off here and in Vegas compared to the previous races. Yes, Colapinto, as I think we mentioned after sprint quali, I think it was, he's running basically a jumble sale of parts that they could just find in and repair in Williams. So there's no surprise that he's struggling there. I think Albon doesn't have as many in terms of struggles and old parts and whatnot, but yeah, look, it's a very close track, and there's not much to say really, apart from Williams just really want to see the end of this season, and who can blame them? It's been a really tough month or so.
I think as well, it's probably a bit of that, but also a combination of Williams. While they've kind of said that they're now a bit better at all-rounder tracks, they're still the Monza specialists, aren't they, in those kind of circuits? So a flat-out Qatar track where it's all about as much downforce as possible and not very long straights and lots of flying quick corners probably wouldn't suit them anyway. But of course, the fact that they've had all these issues is probably hurting them even more for sure.
Other drivers to talk about. Lawson, my biggest good surprise. What a shame. 17th. And it was looking so good after the sprint. And then he lost all of the positions in the sprint almost immediately, and then followed it up with a Q1 exit, which he was not happy with Alonso, and then turned out it was actually Stroll that had slowed down. It feels as though Lawson really does have Alonso in his head, rent-free, because he's not had the greatest of coming together with Fernando. But Hulkenberg, 18th position after beating Max Verstappen in the sprint is ridiculous.
It's absolutely insane. What a turnaround in the opposite sense of Verstappen, that went from beating Max and getting great points for Haas to help them in their quest for 6th, and then a shocker, absolute shocker of a qualifying session when that's normally Hulkenberg's strong point, and Kevin Magnussen of course showed what the car could do, getting it all the way into Q3, so a big missed opportunity for Hulkenberg.
Absolutely. And then finally, it's a shame to see it, Ocon 20th position. He's convinced that there's something not right with the car in comparison to Gasly. Obviously, there is the difference in the front wing.
It's only the nose, it's only the front nose. That must be the greatest front nose ever made in Formula One. If it's making these two drivers, who we always talk about how close they are, this far apart.
Yeah, 9/10 apart in
just
Q1.
Be that.
Yeah, it's quite something because Ocon, as we've said so many times, Ocon and Gasly are so closely match that this is a massive discrepancy. So you do wonder what's really going on in Ocon's car. Let's go to Q2 then, where the 5 drivers out were Gasly, Bottas, Zhou, Tsunoda and Stroll. Question, P1 Patreon member Lumixion. Could there finally be points on the table for Sauber? They're actually in the mix, which is unbelievable to even process, because they've been at the back for so long. They've had what's felt like a Formula 2 car for a lot of the season, and they're 12th and 13th on the grid. They're together. Just don't put Zhou on soft tyres. That's what we're just going to say right here and now. Don't bother with that, because Zhou was lapping at about 4.5 seconds a lap slower than Lando at one point during the sprint on those soft tyres. So let's stick with the mediums and the hards and see what can happen. It's going to require a bit of chaos. I feel as though they are going to fall back in the race, but crazier things have happened. Can you imagine, after all this, Zhou getting destroyed most weekends, pops in a cheeky point for Sauber right at the end of his career? Unbelievable.
Yeah, they're almost in the points if it finishes where they are. You've got to think that particularly Hulkenberg would come through the field, probably hoping that in this era of very reliable Formula One cars, they'd have to bag on a few retirements maybe, surely from the race to be able to get a point. But great qualifying again. Bit of a case of why now, but they're always finishing easily last in the constructors, so I guess it's just a nice confidence boost going into next year.
I suppose the other thing to mention is Tsunoda, 14th. You're probably a little bit gutted, but also RB have just looked pretty nowhere. I know that there was obviously that SQ3 performance from Lawson, but I think that was very much an outperformance. The RB in general looks to have fallen off again a little bit.
Yeah, not good for RB at all, but at least Tsunoda's beaten Lawson after the disappointment of yesterday for his sake, and in that hope of getting the Red Bull seat, if it's even available, because of course one guy we've not spoken about yet is Sergio Perez, who did actually make it.
I haven't said his name, Tommy, and this is really exciting because we're going to go to Q3 now, where the top 10 were Verstappen, Russell, Norris, Piastri, Leclerc, Hamilton, Sainz, Alonso, Perez and Magnussen. I think first and foremost we have to say Max Verstappen. Unbelievable. Pole position out of nowhere. If you then look to the sprint where he was beaten by a Haas, was nowhere really in qualifying for the sprint as well. Question from Andy Kazamar UK. Where did that Max qualifying performance come from after he barely scored in the sprint? Well, it came from the fact that they've dialed in that Red Bull. Perez got through to Q3 as well. Clearly they made some steps forward here. I'm going to say there might be a sprinkling of Sergio Perez doing that little sprint practice session, trying a different front wing as well. Might have had some feedback that's helped to dial in the car slightly. Remember, we've only had one practice session, so it's certainly a massive step forward for Red Bull. I think it's actually teed us up beautifully if Max does keep pole position, which we will discuss very shortly. But I think Verstappen won't have the fastest race pace, but he's at the front and he's going to want to fight.
I know people will probably be going, oh, you would say that because you're a Verstappen fan, but I think it's a great testament to them with this whole parc ferme regulations and allowing them to change things, because one thing we always criticised about the sprint weekends was you essentially got the same result going into another qualifying session, and it's going to be so fascinating if he does get to keep his pole, which I hope and I think he should personally. It's going to be a fascinating race, because I don't think he's definitely got a good car underneath him now and more confident in his car, but I don't think he'll have the race pace of the McLarens, and Russell looked very, very good in the sprint as well, of course. So, yes, exciting.
Let's go to the next question from Shaz X Raz. Do we reckon Max will get a penalty for impeding Russell? Well, we're speaking right now. It's under investigation, but we haven't had an answer. I think it would be a ridiculous penalty for Max Verstappen to get, because George Russell was not on a lap. Now, yes, he was going slower, but that's literally what happens is when you're not on a push lap. George obviously on a different kind of run plan in the sense of trying to get some tyre temperature and whatever, and get the tyres into a perfect condition. But for me, it's not a penalty. Not in any world is that a penalty for Max Verstappen. If George was on a lap, slam dunk, penalty, done, dusted, thank you very much. But they weren't on a lap.
If he did get a penalty, it could open a can of worms and potential pushing of the boundaries and loopholes and things that you could essentially just speed up on your slow lap, go into the back of someone and go, you're going too slow. Because, not saying that George did that, but that's a tactic that people could potentially use to get their rivals penalised. Yeah, I'd be very surprised the fact that it's an out lap for not a fast lap
a second
for George.
Out lap, yeah.
The second out lap is what surely will save Verstappen from that penalty.
Next question, P1 Patreon member Alan Enderpay. Does Russell still have a great chance to give Max a good battle for the race? Russell has been looking consistently quick the whole weekend. I genuinely think Max will be the third fastest car, or third fastest team, when you've got Mercedes with George Russell and then the McLarens. I think Max will have his work cut out. It's a saving grace in some ways that the dirty air does affect the cars behind quite a lot, and running in clean air is really important, as we saw with Lando. I think being able to keep his tyres in a better condition in the sprint. He's going to have to keep the lead, and Max knows very well how to keep the lead into turn one, usually from pole position. So it'll be interesting to see how he manages the race. He doesn't have Perez as a backup, but also Max literally can drive for fun. He has nothing to lose. Russell has nothing to lose. The two McLarens do. So we will probably see Max unleashed.
Having those two at the front that have nothing to lose is going to make it incredible. And I think George Russell is not going to be afraid to get his elbows out against Max Verstappen, and could see it happening. And it'd be great to see them go wheel to wheel and battling at turn one, because, like I say, both nothing to lose. I really, really hope Max doesn't get a penalty, because I think it's set up so beautifully for the race if it stays like this.
And finally, P1 Patreon member Sam, did McLaren's pace fall off, or did the others just catch up? It's the beauty of a sprint weekend. There was genuine improvement, and as Tommy, you mentioned about the Parc Fermé rules as well, which is much better now for a sprint, where you can actually learn from the sprint race to then make changes going into the main weekend. So yeah, I think it's just a case of McLaren got it right straight out the blocks, and other teams have caught up. Well, mainly Red Bull have caught up. So it's as simple as that. It's still very close, right? It's still going to be close. I still believe McLaren are going to have decent race pace. Just look at the sprint. Lando was in control there and could have driven off 4 or 5 seconds down the road, I believe. So I think we're in for a really good race.
McLaren's pace, they still looked very quick throughout the qualifying session, and looked like they could challenge for pole. Lando, of course, made another mistake when he was going for a first lap, which put him under pressure to, have that one lap to deliver, basically, which would have put a big amount of pressure on McLaren, because I still think there was at least a front row there to be had for them. They'll be disappointed with 3-4, but their main fight is with Ferrari, who they of course finish ahead, and they've got phenomenal race pace, so they won't be too disheartened by it.
Yeah, they're ahead of the 2 Ferraris, who have looked all right, but nothing special in the sprint. I think that it looked better for Ferrari with the fact of Lando doing those games, which kept signs in the DRS and things like that. And we're not going to see those tactics tomorrow, because we've got 2 drivers that are not in the same team, both fighting for eternal glory, and that's it. So very excited for that. Tommy, what are your final thoughts, please, sir?
Final thoughts is that I just can't wait for the race, because I think the sprint may be under-delivered with the fact that it's very difficult to overtake, but in a weird way, now the grid is the way it is, that could also make it very interesting if it's close, because Verstappen could well be in a train trying to hold the faster cars off behind him. So cannot wait for that. It's going to be exciting.
And we're going to be live on Twitch for the final time this year, because we're going to be out in Abu Dhabi next week. So come and join us, Matt P1 Tommy, if you haven't followed us on Twitch already. We'd love to see you there for our final watch-along of the year. Very excited. We'll be live a little bit earlier than usual, I think, just to properly celebrate that, because it's been an amazing year, and we'd love to spend some of that time with you. So come along, come chat in the chat, and we will see you very soon. Lots of love. Take care. Adios. Bye.
Goodbye.